This is AWANI Tonight, and I'm Saraya Mia. The war is still on. Health DG urges MOH personnel to give their best shot in battling COVID-19. And are refugees being left behind as country faces another lockdown? That's coming up. Malaysia continued to see an alarming upsurge in COVID-19 cases today, recording 4,855 new infections in the past 24 hours. This is the fourth time the numbers of daily cases has exceeded 4,000 a day in the past week, and the highest since January 31st. Selangor remains the state with the most cases, recording 1,783 cases, more than triple the number of cases in Kuala Lumpur at 521 at second. Meanwhile, 27 deaths from COVID was reported in the past 24 hours, with 8 cases in Selangor. And a total of 481 patients are in the ICU, and 247 require ventilator support. Health Director General Tan Sri Dr. Nur Hisham Abdullah urged Health Ministry personnel to give their best shot in battling the pandemic. During a visit at Hospital Putrajaya today, he said the war is still on and MOH personnel are the last line of defense to break the COVID-19 chain of infection. It is routine for Dr. Nur Hisham to go on Hari Raya Aidilfitri rounds to cheer up healthcare personnel as a sign of his support for frontliners. Healthcare personnel, he said, had been battling for 16 months, and while many are mentally and physically tired, he urged them to persevere and break the chain of infection. He added the ministry was prepared to face the latest wave of the pandemic, which has seen a surge in COVID-19 cases and the emergence of new variants. Dr. Nur Hisham also reminded people to stay at home if they have no important matters to attend to outside and to always abide by the SOPs. With MCO 3.0 in place, Raya celebrations are not the same. With no open houses for visits from friends and family, Malaysians celebrate Hari Raya in moderation. Local fashion designer Izri Kai Hafiz from Fizi Wu said sales were reduced by 60% last year. Izri and designer partner Hafizi Razi Wu said they are bracing for another challenging year ahead.
But one thing different about MCO 3.0 is that usually for all fashion designers out there, after Raya, usually that is the time where we know that it's a downtime for sales, and then it will pick up again in July or August. So we have to endure May and June without significant sales. So by having this MCO, where usually we will like push a lot of discounts, or we are pushing a lot of marketing for Raya celebration itself, but when they announce it, we know that the bad month of sale is going to be longer. So it means that we have to endure as a business longer up until maybe July or August.
Though in moderation, Malaysians celebrating Raya in the new norm still want to keep traditions alive. Hafizi said Wu by Fizi Wu Raya collection this year was tailored specifically to suit the country's economic situation.
I'm sure everyone out there want to feel normal. You know, like they still want to celebrate Raya. So in terms of the design and the product itself, I think everyone out there have to think, have to forecast the trends or like to predict something, you know, like for this year especially, because we already predict there's going to be another MCO. The COVID case will rise. So that's why we keep everything modest.
Kai added that the most important part about being a designer is being able to adapt and strategize products based on the needs of the people and the current circumstances. COVID-19 have hit many communities hard, especially the low-income and vulnerable groups. Refugees are no exception. Their plight is made even more desperate as they struggle with limited resources and insufficient support. Refugee rights activist Heidi Kwa highlights how the community is being pushed to the brink from the third MCO and what Malaysians can do to help.
As I speak to the refugee communities, right, they often tell me that they live in so much fear. Fear when they walk on the streets, sometimes they get harassed. When they go to the shop, sometimes they get harassed and get threatened. And they don't understand what's happening. I think they, as much as we're terrified and we're scared and we're struggling, they are struggling as well with a lot less support.
In the spirit of Raya, Heidi said there is a lot that Malaysians could do to extend kindness and resources, including food, monetary support, or job opportunities to the community.
I think what we really need, as we go through another lockdown once again, and as cases spike up, is compassion and understanding for those around us who are struggling. I think we need to be aware of the needs, and how we can better support the community, because we need to move forward collectively.
As of 2020, there are over 160,000 refugees registered with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Malaysia. Heidi said that while Malaysians have shown strong solidarity with Palestinians who are under attack in Gaza, she also urged people to remember struggling communities at home, including Palestinian refugees in Malaysia.
The past 1.5 years has been especially hard because people are especially xenophobic, right? He goes to the shop and he gets denied access to purchase milk powder for his child, despite working really, really hard for the money. He walks in the streets and gets harassed and stopped by authorities. And I think he's come to a place where he's just extremely jaded, and he keeps asking me, what's the point of living when there is so much suffering, right?
This is the story of a fellow refugee from Afghanistan who tells Heidi about his suffering from PTSD due to constant oppression.
I love that we're engaging conversations and we're educating ourselves and we're speaking up about violence and ethnic cleansing that's happening, But as we get really angry, about what's happening in another country, I think what I came to a place of just urging my friends to go like, hey, that's good, but how do we look at what's happening in our own countries as well? Because there are Palestinian refugees here that are being so heavily persecuted and extended so much violence, right? How do we get angry about what's happening internationally and educate ourselves, but also be aware that in so many ways the vulnerable communities here are being massively oppressed, and they're being threatened daily. They're constantly being harassed. If we're not okay with what's happening in Palestine and in Myanmar, we cannot be okay with what's happening here as well.
We'll take a short break. Stay with us.
Ramai yang nak datang ni. Ada Pak Lang, Mak Anda. Tak boleh ni. Dah tak rupa orang dah ni.
Pencukur serbaguna Philips Siri 7000 ini adalah gabungan 14 alat dalam satu.
Ia membolehkan korang untuk bercukur daripada hujung rambut sampai ke hujung kaki. Alamak, bersipah pula.
Memperkenalkan vacuum tanpa wayar Philips Siri 8000 Aqua. Vacuum Philips ini boleh membersihkan permukaan lantai bilik air, dapur, ruang tamu. Mana-mana permukaan pun boleh.
Philips.
Thailand reported its largest ever spike in COVID-19 infections today, with more than half coming from 2 Bangkok prisons. The kingdom is battling a third wave of the virus that has forced the government to impose restrictions on movement, rules on mask wearing, and close public spaces. Thailand reported more than 4,800 infections, its highest single-day jump yet, which included over 2,800 cases found in 2 prisons in Bangkok. The outbreak in the prisons was brought to light in late April when an activist at the forefront of Thailand's democracy movement announced that he had tested positive for COVID-19, along with 25 inmates in his wing at Bangkok Remand Prison. On Thursday, student pro-democracy leader known as Mike, who is also behind bars, tested positive. Local reports say prisons in Chiang Mai and Narathiwat are also finding hundreds of cases. India recorded more than 4,000 COVID-19 deaths for a second straight day. Infections, meanwhile, stayed below 400,000 for a 4th day, although the virus has become rampant in rural areas where cases can go unreported due to a lack of testing. Concern is growing about the transmissibility of the variant that is driving infections in India and spreading worldwide. The situation is particularly bad in rural areas of Uttar Pradesh, India's most populous state with over 230 million people. Bodies have washed up in the Ganges River as crematoriums are overwhelmed by the surge in deaths. The federal government has ruled out a complete lockdown to contain the worsening situation. But some states have imposed night curfews or partial lockdowns. Muslims around the world are celebrating Eid al-Fitr in a subdued mood, as many countries are still coping with coronavirus restrictions. In Indonesia, continued restrictions meant Indonesians weren't allowed to travel to visit relatives in the traditional homecoming known locally as mudik. Despite the mudik ban, thousands of worshippers showed up for morning prayers at Al-Azhar Mosque in Jakarta. For a second year running, the pandemic has kept most mosques closed in Indonesia, except for mosques in low-risk areas. The Jakarta government also ordered malls, restaurants and leisure destinations usually packed during the holiday period to shut. A year ago, Indonesia's daily new cases rose by more than a third after the holiday. In Turkey, hundreds of Muslims attended dawned Eid al-Fitr prayers at Istanbul's iconic Hagia Sophia on for the first time since it was reconverted into mosque last year. Originally a cathedral, the Hagia Sophia was turned into a mosque after Istanbul's conquest by the Ottoman Empire and has been a museum for the last 86 years, drawing millions of tourists annually. Last July, Turkey's president formally converted the religious landmark back into a mosque and declared it open for Muslim worship. In Gaza City, weary Palestinians prepared for a somber feast to mark Eid al-Fitr. There were little sign of festive spirit in Gaza following sustained Israeli airstrikes. Gaza resident Hassan Abu Shaban tried to lighten the mood by passing candies to passerby after prayers, but admits there is no atmosphere for Eid at all.
بوزع شوكولاتة عشان بدي أحس بفرحة العيد وحسس اللي حواليا بفرحة العيد لأنه أنت شايف العيد ملهوش طعم نهائيا كله قصف ودمار وخراب وربنا يهونها إن شاء الله عليه.
The fiercest hostilities in years between Israel and Palestine is dragging on with no end in sight. Deaths are mounting on both sides as hundreds of rockets hit Israel, while Israeli military ramps up its deadly airstrikes on Gaza. World powers are reiterating calls for calm amid intensifying clashes in Gaza. Israel's bombing of Gaza has now killed at least 83 people, including 17 children, and injured more than 480. Fighting between Israel and Hamas escalated in what has become the heaviest flare-up since the 2014 Gaza war. Israel military said it is preparing combat troops along the Gaza border for ground operations. The United Nations, meanwhile, warned that the conflict could turn into a full-scale war. Airstrikes continue throughout the day, with Israel stepping up its offensive in the Gaza Strip as Hamas fired rockets at central and southern Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to continue to strike at the military capabilities of Hamas and other Gaza groups. Buying new clothes and apparel for the festive season is a gesture of hope and a chance to sparkle socially. But how is the current mood shaping tastes? Tonight on Consider This, Melissa Idris and Sharad Kutan speak to designers Alia Bastamam and Nelissa Hillman about Hari Raya styling this year. That is all on AWANI Tonight. You can get the latest news updates on COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines from astroawani.com and Astro AWANI app. I'm Saraya Mia on behalf of the AWANI Tonight team, wishing all of you a Selamat Hari Raya Maaf Zahir dan Batin.